Good morning, all. We're just waiting for a number of others to join us this morning, but welcome. Welcome to our Checkpoint Support and Technology Review. Before we start, I'm just going to run through a handful of webinar housekeeping bits and pieces. So during the webinar, you'll obviously be muted. Please keep an eye on that. I know we can occasionally suffer from the odd technical hiccup with the muting, so please keep an eye and ensure that we are muted. I'm aware that a number of us are all working from home and probably have a few interesting sounds in the background, so if you could just keep an eye on that, that'd be fantastic. But if you'd like to submit any questions at any time, please do add those into the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. There will be a Q&A session at the end to answer any submitted questions. And of course, where polls are taking place, please be sure that the polls will be anonymous. And we hope that to get some good participation in answering some of those queries. But of course, the webinar is recorded, and that recording will be made available to you after the session. So, from an agenda perspective today, we'll very briefly cover who are Bytes. I'm sure a number of you are well aware of who and what we do already. But for those of you who are unfamiliar or joining us for the first time, we'll give you a short overview. We'll cover some Checkpoint end of support announcements, a number of the end of support and end of engineering support notifications, the new appliance lineup, for which there have been a number of changes, R80.40, what's new, and of course, R81, what's new. So, for the few of you who may not have met us before, who are Bytes? Well, in a nutshell, we're here to enable effective and cost-efficient technology sourcing, adoption, security and management of software, hardware, and cloud services as a group. We're actually made up of a number of different areas within the organization, covering licensing and SAN, security, end-user computing, data center, data management, cloud, of course. We have a number of services and management capabilities, and of course, training. In terms of security, for which a number of you will know Jay Patel, Head of Technical Services, who's going to be hosting the webinar this morning alongside Mr. Manning from Checkpoint. Our security business covers a number of technology partnerships and has been a known business within the channel for around about 20 years. We have a really broad technical services portfolio, of which Jay Patel is a very important part of running that part of the organization. We take pride in running and holding a number of accreditations within the security industry. And alongside Checkpoint, have been delivered a number of awards over the last few years. Most recently, within the context of the current conversation, Checkpoint's Partner of the Year and the first Checkpoint Infinity Specialist. And more recently, over the last number of years, a few of you will hopefully have been engaged in cyber consulting. But I think the standout areas within that quality of service section on the screen just now, really good high customer satisfaction rate. And thanks to Jay's team, we actually closed a really good number of tickets last year, and hope that this technical session is a good roundup of knowledge.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Jez, for that. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As Jez has already introduced me, I'm Jay Patel. I head up the Technical Solutions team here at Bytes. With me today on the webinar as well, we have our Checkpoint SE, Matt Manning, So between us, we'll be happy to answer any queries you have. And if we can't, we'll make sure we can come back to you post the webinar. So before I start, I would like to do a quick poll. So would appreciate if everyone can participate. As Jez mentioned already, it will be anonymous, so please feel free. It would be great to see you guys participate. And we'll come back to the results at the end of the slide. So let's start off with the end of support notification for software. So Checkpoint provides support for their support products for a minimum of 4 years from the general availability date. General date of the major version. So, for example, 7730 was released in May 2015 and went out for support in May 2019. In addition, Checkpoint also aims to support a minimum of 2 major versions of all software products. It is worth mentioning that major version doesn't necessarily mean R77, R80, and 81. 7730 and 8020 were also classed as major versions. So basically, any version that introduces major new functionalities and new technologies is basically classed as a major version. And when the major version goes out of support, so does their respective minor versions. So with that quick refresher out of the way, the major version that's about to go end of support is R80, and as because of that, 8010, which is its minor version. And they will end of support in May 2021, so not many months left now. Obviously, I doubt anyone is on R80 as that was a management only release. So it's more likely, if there's people still out there, it's more likely it's going to be on 8010. Now I'd like to think that most organizations are already on 8040 or 8030 at least, but judging by the amount of upgrades that we've done in the past year alone, taking customers from not only 8010 to 8040, which is what we've been doing, but still doing upgrades from 7730, believe it or not. And I suspect there's still customers out there on 8010. So if you are one of those customers on 8010, please start thinking about getting the upgrades planned. Now, given the current global situation, obviously there's going to be concerns, which is perfectly acceptable, around doing upgrades remotely. You'll be pleased to know that we've done dozens and dozens of successful upgrades remotely. I mean, if I had to put a number on the exact consulting days, we've done more than 450 consulting days in the last year alone, and 99% of those were all delivered remotely. So if you do have any queries or concerns you'd like to discuss, around how to go about approaching getting these upgrades done remotely, please reach out and we'll be more than happy to help. So let's have a look at the results of the poll, see where most people are. So, okay, like I said, it is an anonymous poll, so we've got 16% still on 7730, 12% on 8010, but a fair few majority on 8020 and 8030. Not as many as I would have hoped and liked to be on 8040. That's fine. So, guys, the ones who are still on 7730, obviously be aware that went out of support in May 2019. So you are running at risk should you have a problem with any of that version of the Go. Please do get in touch. And like I said, we'll be more than happy to help you guys with that. Okay, so moving on. Next, I'd like to talk about, or rather, should I say, draw your attention to the endpoints as well. So the end of support for endpoint clients is 4 years from the date it goes GA, or the second subsequent major version has been released. Okay, so effectively, Checkpoint will only support 2 major releases of their Checkpoint software. And that includes your SandBlast endpoint agent, which you guys, if you're aware, you manage it through your endpoint server, and it provides endpoint protections such as full disk encryption, anti-bot, threat emulation, etc., etc., as well as your standalone VPN clients, which effectively terminate on your remote access VPN gateway. So it consists of both of those products, okay, those versions. So the major versions currently under support are E84 and E83. So E82 and the versions below are currently out of support. Just bear that in mind. Now, once we've found that customers with endpoint security servers are fairly good at updating the endpoint clients on a regular basis, because I suppose they see updating the client that effectively provides threat protection as equally important as keeping their threat prevention definitions up to date. Whereas what we found is customers that use the client solely for the purposes of VPN seem to just install and forget. And let's face it, it just works, right? So, you know, if it's working, why go and upgrade it or do anything with it? But you do need to build in some capability for upgrading those VPN clients. It shouldn't really be treated as a fire and forget client for the entire age of it. Obviously, most popular way of upgrading these clients, if it's just a standalone VPN, is using tools like SCCM or Intune. But if you aren't aware, you can also do upgrades by placing the updated client cap file on the gateway. And what happens is when the clients connect to the gateway, they have the option to upgrade that client automatically. Again, if not something you're familiar with, please do reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to help you guys through that journey. Next up is appliances. Now, appliances, in addition to having an end of support deadline, they also have something called end of engineering support, okay, which is a couple of years before the end of support deadline. And what that means is from the date an appliance goes end of engineering support, any new software release after that date is not supported on that hardware. If there's a bug in the software that's running supported on that end of engineering appliance, Checkpoint will try and resolve that. But if it's to do with the compatibility of the software with the hardware, then it's best efforts, okay? The 2012 appliances range went end of engineering support in June 2020, so last year. So whilst it is still in support until June 2022 next year, the appliances will not run R81, which came out at the end of last year, okay? The appliances I've listed here below are all the 2012 appliances. So excluding the 21600, which you can see third from the bottom, that's the one that went end of support in October 2019. But all of the other 2012 appliances, end of support is June 2022. So like I said, you know, whilst they'll run 8040, they will not support R81. Other equally pertinent point I'd like to raise is that these are, needless to say, really, really old appliances, right? Coming up to 10 years now. And whilst what we've seen is they may have been okay up until maybe March last year, we've seen so many instances where customers' firewalls have started creaking with the additional load when their entire workforce started working remotely to the point they started disabling security blades just to keep the business operational. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that's not the best approach to dealing with aging hardware. So do start thinking about getting the hardware refreshes done. Again, we've done dozens and dozens of hardware refresh projects remotely over the last year. In fact, this isn't something new. We've been doing hardware refreshes for our global customers over the years. All we've now done is extended those same stringent processes and approach that we use to de-risk those remote installs to all of our UK-based customers. So again, you know, looking to do a hardware refresh, but if you're concerned about the risks of doing it remotely, please talk to us. We can arrange a call with one of our consultants who will, you know, happily go through your requirements in detail and draw up a detailed plan that de-risks the project. despite the work being done remotely. Now, I've covered the end of support for software, endpoint, 2012 appliances, but there's obviously much more to Checkpoint's product and software suite. There's SMB appliances, branch office appliances, smart one appliances. So we simply haven't got the time to cover every single product and software. So I would like to invite you to review Checkpoint Support's Lifecycle policy, which is publicly available on this link, and just make sure that you're up to date with where things are with any of the other appliances you may have in your environment, specifically anything that we haven't covered here. So that's the key end of support notifications out of the way. So let's now have a look at the new appliances. So Checkpoint released a new line of appliances last year called the Quantum Security Gateways. What you see here is effectively the catalog of appliances categorized into market segments. The ones in gray below are the 2016 appliances, and in this light grayish blue above is what we have the quantum appliances, with at least 2 appliances per market segment to replace those older appliances. Needless to say, they're all much faster than the predecessors, the 2016 appliances, and faster by leaps and bounds when you compare them against the 2012 appliances. All of the quantum appliances come with SandBlast subscription bundled in for the first year, which is effectively all of the security blades that you can run on an appliance. And after the first year, you have the option to either renew with SandBlast or NGTP, or you can go down to NGFW as well. In terms of key features, with the quantum appliances, Checkpoint have decided to go solid state only, all the way from the branch office appliances to the data center appliances. They offer a second power supply option, again, for all models, including the branch office appliances, which is the 3600, 3800s. Another cool feature with these appliances is that they all support dynamic workloads, which effectively bolsters the performance of these appliances even further. I'll talk about this later on, but effectively what dynamic workloads does, or dynamic balancing does, is effectively the split between the firewall cores and the traffic handling cores changes dynamically based on the load, so it doesn't require a reboot or cause an outage. So software feature, but it's being made available with the quantum appliances. All have the latest CPUs, and they all come with DDR4 RAM. And lastly, excluding the branch office appliances, from the small enterprise to the data center enterprise appliances, you have the option for lights out management, or the LOM module, if you go for the plus configuration. Okay, so all in all, I think it's an impressive lineup of appliances that effectively gives you not just the best of the latest hardware, but combines it with performance improvements in software, and obviously the fact that it comes with SandBlast subscription bundled in free of cost for the first year as well. Now that we've covered appliances, let's look at 8040 and some of the key features. So 8040 came out last year in Jan 2020, and is at the moment considered the current recommended stable release. It came out with a fair amount of new features and functionalities. Obviously not going to be able to go through all of them in the time we have. So what I'll do is I'll focus on some of the key features. So starting with the first one, which is the revert to previous revision. Now, for those of you who've been working with Checkpoint long enough, pre our 80 days, will remember database revisions, which was a tool to effectively save and restore revisions of your management server database, right? This functionality was deprecated with R80, and is instead what Checkpoint did is they replaced it with the ability to revert the gateway policy by installing a specific version of the gateway policy whilst keeping the most up-to-date changes on the database. Their idea behind this, from Checkpoint's perspective, is if you've made a lot of changes and if you push the policy, that maybe caused an issue, rather than revert the whole database, just push the last successful policy and look at the logs to find out what caused the issue and just fix that specific issue rather than losing all the changes. I have a funny feeling that Checkpoint community pushed back on that because it was a fairly popular feature that many people used. And so with 8040, they have brought that back. So effectively, it's within management settings and revisions, where I think if you remember, those who aren't on 8040, you can still see the revisions. You can view stuff, but you didn't have the ability to revert back. You now can. So effectively, you select on the version, and you can just do revert to this version. You still, by the way, have the ability to also install the last successful policy rather than revert the whole database. So that they haven't taken that away. That's still there. Moving on is HTTPS inspection policy. So if you're not on 8040 yet, and if you do use HTTPS inspection policy, you're probably still using the legacy smart dashboard to maintain that policy. From 8040, HTTPS inspection policy is now integrated within Smart Console, so you no longer need to launch a dashboard. And as part of that, what they've done is HTTPS inspection is a layer, right? So you can now create different HTTPS inspection layers for different policy packages. So effectively, when you create a policy package, you can either choose to use the predefined HTTPS inspection layer, or you can customize it based on your needs. And the fact that it's a layer, as I mentioned earlier, you can share that layer across multiple packages. For example, if you have multiple gateways, they all run different policy packages, and you want some of them to share one type of HTTPS inspection policy, you can create a specific layer and you can share it among those policies, but not everything. So that's quite a key change and feature which didn't exist before 8040. You just had one HTTPS inspection policy. Whilst we're on the subject of HTTPS inspection, you also have the ability to use updatable object within the HTTPS inspection policy, which is really, really handy. For example, if you wanted to bypass, say, HTTPS inspection, as you can see on the screen here, for Office 365 services, rather than creating custom URL lists and adding dozens and dozens of URLs and IPs published by Microsoft, which will probably change in a couple of days, you can simply use the Office 365 updatable object. Okay. For anyone who's tried HTTPS inspection, or they are already running HTTPS inspection, will know the challenge with applications and services that use certificate pinning. What Checkpoint have started to do with 8040 is they have started to collect list of services that they know will break with HTTPS inspection, because it uses certificate pinning, and they've started to put this category called HTTPS services bypass, and they've started adding it in there. There's a couple of subcategories. I haven't got a screenshot, but there's one which is recommended bypass, and another one which is optional. And you simply add it to your destination, and it's much easier because if you're using HTTPS inspection, then those services will break because they use either certificate pinning or mutual authentication of some sort. Moving on is the ability to share views and reports. So pre-8040, if you create a custom report or a view within your smart event, other admins who logged on Smart Console couldn't see those views that you've created, and you didn't have the ability to share it with them either. From 8040, now obviously you can simply select the report, and as you can see on the screen here, you can share it with other admins. Where this is useful is if you are using the web front end of Smart Event, which is Smart View, to display, say, reports or views on a knock screen, for example. So basically, you'd create a view with the widgets that you want to display on a knock screen, and then share it with the other admins. So, for example, someone with a knock account, which is read-only, can log into Smart Event with their account, and they'll be able to see the view that you've created and put it up on the knock screen. So again, Really useful feature. Moving on is machine authentication, which again came out with 8040. So I think I've seen a fair amount of businesses already use computer certificates in Active Directory for wireless access. So rather than just depending on usernames, they also map machine names to that 802.x. So not only does the user need to be authorized, but also the machine has to be authorized to be on the wireless network. So it makes complete sense to extend that to the VPN, because effectively allows you to add an additional layer of authentication to ensure that only the corporate machines can VPN in to the network. And finally, you can now do that with 8040. Fairly straightforward. You need to define your Active Directory CA within Smart Console. Ensure that all of any machines that are going to be partaking in that remote access VPN, they are enrolled with that CA to ensure they have a machine certificate. And then, as you can see on the screen here, you enforce machine certificate authentication on the gateway that's responsible for your remote access VPN. You can choose to make it mandatory if you want to enforce it, or you can make it, choose to be available. And as I said earlier, because this acts as that additional layer of authentication, what actually happens is when your user connects in to the VPN, it prompts them for the username password. But in the background, the client will also check for the machine certificate against your Active Directory CA. And only if the CRO check passes, the client is allowed to connect to the VPN. So again, really useful feature if you're looking to further strengthen that security posture. Moving on, smart tasks. Smart task is all about automating tasks. So the way it works is you can configure a specific action and define the trigger that will activate that action. So the available triggers are before publish, after publish, and install policy. So for example, on the screen here, what you see is there's a script that is used to run a validation check before publishing. And all it's checking for is whether the session has the prefix CR. It's fairly simple. Obviously, this is just one example. You can do much more with this. If you are familiar with GitHub, there's already a few scripts people have uploaded for kind of the wider checkpoint community to use. Or if you're comfortable with writing scripts yourself, you can, by all means, you can do that to try and automate these tasks. So that's smart tasks. Moving on, another nice little feature that came out with 8040 is the ability to enforce security for your IoT devices. So in order for you to utilize this specific functionality, you do need to have an Iot Discovery service, which is effectively a third-party source that scans your network for IoT devices, and it provides all the device attributes for the devices that it's scanned to the Checkpoint firewall. The ones I've listed on the right, these are the ones Checkpoint currently integrate with. And what you can then do is effectively configure your management server to integrate with these discovery services. And that then allows you to pull all of the asset information into Smart Console. So these 15 IoT assets that you see here highlighted within Smart Console are the ones that have been imported from the discovery service. And you can then start using these into your IoT access control policy to start enforcing policy around those, as you can see here in rules 2.1 to 2.3. So it's quite similar to, for anyone who's familiar with Cloud Route Controller, where you can pull in objects from your cloud environment, whether it's Azure, AWS, or GCP, and you can use those objects dynamically in the policy. So that's all I want to quickly touch on 8040. Moving on to 81, which was released October, so I would say end of October 2020. so not long ago, and it came out obviously with a fairly long list of new features and enhancements. Again, we'll focus on the key features, and I'll start off with Infinity Threat Prevention. Now, since the launch of R80, Checkpoint have been consistently improvising the day-to-day management of IPS and even the threat prevention blades. So, for example, maintaining IPS has been made so much easier than the old days using tags. The fact that you have the ability to tweak IPS profiles so that it disables any protections you don't want and only enables protections that you want, again, using tags. The ability to automatically save multiple IPS updates. So if you had to revert to a previous IPS update, you can do that without impacting any of the other security configuration. The fact that it gave you even more granular control over, by having multiple threat prevention profiles on the gateways. So they've made massive improvements in terms of ease of use and management of the threat prevention profile. With 81, Checkpoint are taking that, specifically that ease of management, and not just for IPS, but threat prevention in general, so all of the other blades as well, even further. And they've called it Infinity Threat Prevention. So effectively, rather than selecting threat prevention, you select Infinity Threat Prevention on your gateway, and where you'd rather, effectively by doing that, all it does is it will go and check your license, and based on the license, it will select and enable the blade that you're licensed for automatically. Okay, simple UI in terms of what's the right word? Single click configuration, I suppose, where you select one of these 5 out-of-the-box profiles based on the role of the gateway. So, is your gateway protecting your perimeter, or is it protecting a data center and protecting the east-west traffic? And effectively, you select one of these profiles based on the role. And when you do select, the gateway is immediately configured according to Checkpoint's best practices for that specific scenario. And that includes IPS, all of the protections, which protections turn on, which protections to disable based on Checkpoint's experience, how to tweak file protection and URL reputation protections, doing tweaks around sandboxing, so your threat emulation stuff, threat extraction, and CMC protection, so effectively your anti-bot that you're familiar with. There's a little bit that you can tweak. You can do that within this deployment dashboard, as you can see here. So, for example, at the bottom, you can see wireless guest network will be exempt from the entire policy. Internal lab will be detect only, but everything else will be as per the profile, right? So definitely a big step in terms of the ease of management of your threat prevention profile. A common question we get asked is, should we use it? Answer is, it depends. I think if you want to be completely hands-off and just let Checkpoint configure your threat prevention policy, then absolutely yes. If instead you're one of those customers, you want to be able to provide, if you want to be able to have granular control over your threat prevention policy, then you still have the traditional threat prevention profiles. It's still there. But now with 81, you effectively have the choice of opting for that ease of management with threat prevention. So that's Infinity Threat Prevention. Moving on is hit count for NAT rules. Now, ever since I think it was 7540, Checkpoint introduced hit count for firewall rules. Hit counts for NAT rules have been one of the most requested features. Finally, it's here. So if you are managing Checkpoint infrastructure that's got plenty of NAT rules that have been put in place years ago, and you're not sure if you can delete them to tidy up the NAT rule base, finally now you can. Bear in mind, you do need the management server and the gateway to be on 81 to be able to utilize this feature, because it's not a management only feature. So if you're thinking of running this on management server, but with 20 to 12 appliances, but because 22 appliances can't go on 81, you won't be able to utilize this feature or gain the benefits of that with those older appliances. Whilst we're on the subject of naturals, another cool feature I think as well is the fact that you can now use updatable objects in naturals. So you can use the likes of domain objects, security zones. As you can see here, I'm using a DMZ zone, access roles, data center objects, and even updatable objects. The ones I showed you from the HTTPS inspection, as you can see. So effectively, what I'm using here is any traffic from my DMZ zone going to Office 365 services, hide behind a specific IP address. So you can now be that granular with your naturals as well, thanks to the updatable objects. Moving on is concurrent security policy installation. So in earlier versions, you've been able to do policy installations to multiple gateways, right? Provided it's the same policy and the policy is being pushed by the same administrator. From 81, one or more administrator can push different policy installs on multiple gateways at the same time. Concurrent policy install is only supported at the moment on access control and threat prevention policies. So if you're using desktop and QoS policies, it doesn't do that. But I've found people tend to use those policies once and then they don't tend to push those policies unless they make changes. So I don't think it's that relevant. You can push, I think at the same time, 5 different policies. If it's more than 5 different policies, then the request beyond the 5th, I think, gets in a queue. In my experience working with Checkpoint, I've seen people with like 3, 4 different policies, but I haven't really seen more than 5. But yeah, so that's concurrent security policy installation. Moving on, TLS 1.3 support is finally here. So you're probably all aware, 1.3 is the latest version of TLS protocol. Effectively provides better security and much lower latency as compared to the previous versions. It is becoming quite prominent among web servers, and it's also now, I think, supported by most of the web browsers. The challenge with TLS 1.3 is that all of the handshake messages, other than I think the client hello and the server hello, are encrypted. So pre-R81, if you are doing HTTPS decryption, Checkpoint gateway would downgrade the TLS protocol to TLS 1.2, and URL categorization and everything would work fine. If you weren't doing HTTPS decryption, and if you had that tick box which says categorize HTTPS website, TLS 1.3 could not be categorized by those. And to be honest, even with 81, even if you're the fact that it supports TLS 1.3, you have to bear this in mind. If you come across sites that are TLS 1.3, and if you're not doing SSL inspection, you can't categorize, you can't look inside, you can't do all of the clever stuff that you've been able to do because it's so inherently secure. So just bear that in mind. But with 81, it's now possible. So TLS 1.3, by them developing this new engine, I think it's called TLS-IO. It is based on user space firewall architecture, so bear that in mind. And the actual TLS 1.3 scanning is disabled by default, but you can enable that. The list on the right is the appliances that come with user space firewall enabled by default. There are some additional appliances that aren't listed here that are also user space firewall certified appliances, but they don't run in user space firewall by default. You have to enable it. The SK I've mentioned on the left has got more information around what those appliances are, and also kind of the benefits, limitations, all of that around user space firewall. Moving on to the next one, which is data center query-based objects. Now, hopefully, you are all aware of the feature. I mean, this has been around for ages. Is the Cloud Work Controller, which effectively allows you to import objects from your cloud environment dynamically into your rule base. So, AWS, Azure, GCP, and you can import those objects dynamically, and you can use them in the rule base rather than creating those objects manually. Now, if your organization has a multi-cloud environment, so say you have regions in AWS, Azure, and GCP, and say, for example, taking this example, if you are tagging all of your R&D servers with department equals R&D, and you want your on-prem Terraform server to access all R&D instances irrespective of what cloud they're in. Pre-R81, what you do is you would import the department equals R&D tag for each of your data center, right? So one from your AWS Mumbai, another one from AWS California, and so forth. With 81, what you can do is you can create what's called a data center query that effectively queries all your data center objects for a specific query. Okay, so in this example, we're querying for the tag of department with a value of R&D, and you can then use that query object in your rule base. So rather than using those individual tag objects for every single one of the data centers, you just use this specific query object, and effectively, by doing this, you're simplifying that automation piece of the policy enforcement if you have multi-cloud checkpoint environments. Okay, so that's data center query. Moving on is R81, the Web Smart Console. So this wasn't released with, by the way, with the GA version of 81. It was released with, I believe, Jumbo Take 10 for 81. So effectively, Web Smart Console provides you Smart Console functionality from any web browser. Okay, the goal is to have feature parity between your FAT application, Smart Console, and your web browser. At the moment, it's read-only. But the plan is that with every R81 Jumbo hotfix, they will keep adding more and more functionality to the Web Smart Console. So again, much awaited feature, and yeah, I think as they add more Jumbos, you'll see much more in terms of functionality. But at the moment, it's there. Once you install the Jumbo, as you can see on the screenshot, you simply navigate to the IP address of your SmartTent server /Smart Console, and you can get the view. And you can view at the moment logs, reports, gateways, objects, all of that through there. Okay. So pre-R81, if you want to check the changes made in a specific session, you go to this screen where I am. So Manage Settings, Revisions, you select revision. I haven't got the right screenshot here, apologies, but you click on audit logs and you would see all of the changes that you've made for that session as a kind of a line item. And you can double click each of those line items, you get a pop-up and you'd understand what the change you've been made. So whilst the information was there, it wasn't quite summarized in a single page. With 81, you now finally have the ability to generate a report that effectively shows the comparison in terms of the changes that have been made between two selected versions or revisions, shall I say. So once you publish your changes, you come to this view, select a version, go to the changes that I've highlighted, and you can generate a report, and it will show you the report. And the report will show you the comparison effectively between those sessions that you selected, and it will show you the number of changes and the type of changes. So is it a new amendment or deletion? For access control, threat prevention, objects, you can see further down, it's showing me the rule information that was created. And if you scroll further down, it will show you the objects that were created or amended, deleted, and it gives you all of that information in a nice single page. So really, really useful. You can also, by the way, this is another cool thing I think really liked about this, is the fact that obviously what I showed earlier was what you can view once you've published the change. If you haven't published the changes, it was quite difficult pre-R81 to knowing if you, especially if you're in the middle of a big change, to know how far you've got to making those changes. You can click on changes now in 81 midway through, and it will still show you the changes that you've made within the current session. Again, I think that's really, really useful to know. Moving on, so down balancing, so I touched upon this feature whilst I was talking about quantum appliances. This is a feature, as I mentioned then, it's effectively splits, effectively the split between the Core XL SNDs and the Core XL firewall changes dynamically based on the load, right? And it doesn't require you to reboot or cause an outage. For any of you've ever had tweak Core XL, would remember that you can manually assign a CPU core to either a firewall instance or SND, which is effectively responsible for handling traffic. And you could do that based on what's happening with your gateway. So if your gateway's firewall kernels were struggling, you could take one core out of SND pool and give it to the firewall kernels, or vice versa. But that still needed you to kind of make that change, and you had to reboot the gateway. With 81, that now happens dynamically. These are all the supported models that I've mentioned on the screen. So although I'm covering this as part of 81, because with 81 on these appliances enabled by default, there's nothing for you to do. It is also supported with 8040 with the jumbo hotfix state 25 and higher, so you just need to enable it on 8040. It isn't supported in VSX or Maestro, and I'm pretty certain it's not supported with open servers either. So it's literally just these appliances, like I mentioned. It's a software functionality that they've enabled with the quantum appliances and some of the older appliances. With that, we're coming on to kind of the last, but definitely not the least, and that's the accelerated policy install. Now, before I start, I'd like to do another quick poll here, please. If you would mind, again, if you could have some participation from everyone, that would be really useful. So typically, policy installation time will depend on a number of factors, right? The number of objects, the size of the rule base, resource utilization on the management server. There's plenty of factors, but it will range. Now, with 81, Checkpoint have introduced the much awaited accelerated access control policy install, which effectively only installs the Delta changes. Okay. Now, seeing how cool a feature this is, rather than just talk about this, I thought it might be a good idea to demo this. So if you bear with me, I'm just going to flip across to my jump server. And if someone can confirm they can see my screen.
Yes, Jay, we can.
But strangely, I can't see my screen. That's strange. Right, I'm just going to stop sharing, guys. Apologies for this. I'm just going to try and share again. Right, hopefully everyone can see the screen still.
Yes, we can, Jay.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Cheers, Michael. So what we're going to do is create a typical firewall change request. Okay. So all I'm going to do is create a couple of new hosts, a new network, create a new rule. But rather than do them manually, I have written them down here in a script. Okay. So use the management CLI, paste that in, enter, and there you go. So hopefully I should now have my objects. I've got my 5 new hosts, I've got rule, and let's install the policy. Let's do a publish and choose the policy. Okay, that's not good. Live demos and all. I'm hoping it's only licensing one, but you'll see that sign there Hopefully you can see that took less than 9 seconds. That sign there tells you if the policy acceleration is happening on that specific install. There are few instances where it doesn't. For example, you're trying to install a policy package that's different to the one installed on the gateway. If you've made some changes to the underlying lib directory on the FWDIR, if you've made certain things, and there's literally very few things that causes policy acceleration to not happen. But in majority of the cases, your standard day-to-day BAU changes, you should get this benefit. So yes, it's a lab install, with not that many rules, not that many objects. But even then, before I'd go to my setup to 81, my policy installs were between 55 seconds to about a minute, 5 seconds, something along those lines. And you can see that's gone down to 9 seconds. So really, really cool feature, as I've mentioned. And I think with that, let me swap across to my PowerPoint deck. Michael, I don't know if you can please share the poll results. So yeah, I think what I've seen, I can see there's 4% who's saying they've got 20 to 30 seconds. I'm assuming you're either on 81 or you've got a really tiny policy, but that's impressive. But most we can see on the poll, 48%, which highest is between 30 and 60 seconds. More than 40% saying 60 plus seconds, and 8% is above 5 minutes. So that's really useful. Thanks a lot for participating, guys. And that's it from me in terms of what I want to cover as part of 81 and all of the new features. Obviously, I'm hoping that you guys have been submitting Q&As through the panel. Manning, Michael, haven't been keeping a tab on the questions, but let me know if there's questions on there to look at.
Yeah, so we've had 2 questions come in.
Okay.
So I just want to quickly say thank you to everybody for joining today. If you do have questions, please put them into the questions box or the chat box, and I'll be sure to pose them now. If you do think of any more after the session, send them to the email address on here and we'll be sure to answer you. It's tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. So the first question we've got is, end of support showed 2022 for the successor models. That's only a year away. So guess it's not good to go for successor model from that list.
So yeah, so
replacing,
where I'll go back to that slide. So what it is that successor model is not necessarily the quantum appliances. The successor model there, because this is the 2012 appliances, these are the appliances that came out in 2016. But the end of support here isn't for the successor models. The end of support is for the 2012 appliances. Hope that answers that question and clarifies that.
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
Then the next question is, what integration do we have with Azure AD?
Yes, so there is integration with Azure AD that's been introduced with as part of 81 as well. There's a fairly detailed tech note on that, and to be honest, whoever's asked that question, I'm happy to take that offline. But yes, there is AD integration with 81 in terms of using Azure AD from a identity awareness perspective. So you can do the SAML integration and identity awareness, and you can import objects into your checkpoint firewall and use those identity awareness objects from Azure AD as well.
Great. So then we've got one more question.
Yep.
So are there any updates in VSX?
Yes, there are. I haven't got the list in front of me, but there's plenty of updates. I don't know, Manning, if you have a list in front of you around VSX. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here.
No worries. So for those of you who aren't aware of what VSX is our, essentially, think of it a bit like a hypervisor, but for your firewalls. In a single appliance, you can run multiple different firewalls inside one appliance. And this is really good for people who got very, very sort of delegated roles inside their business. It's quite honest, to be honest, to say that actually we've had a few feature parities missing in some of the older releases. But in this release of R81, we have integrated virtual system load sharing mode and multi-bridge mode into it, which is a really important thing that many of our customers have needed. And we've also integrated some updates to the VSX Gateway API controls. So it's actually possible now to create the cluster objects in the management infrastructure. Now, if you're using large-scale orchestration and automation, the ability to actually run sort of scripts and coding to communicate with this platform to build the cluster objects and build your rule bases really gives you a really powerful tool to be able to kind of create these systems on the fly. There's a couple of other key bits. One, dynamic VPN routing has been included. That's really, really important for people who are integrating to platforms like Azure. They want to create VPNs to those types of environments. And we also now support independent quality of service, DNS proxies, servers, per virtual systems as well. That used to be a per appliance feature, but you can now do that at a per virtual system level. So some really key features that we've finally brought through into this release, which I think has been massively popular to our customers who are using this technology. So that's really good.
Thanks a lot, Manning.
That sounds good. I see we've got
another question around Azure MFA with VPNs instead of third party with 8040. Yes, you can. We do that internally at the moment. There's a fairly detailed techno on how to integrate Azure MFA with your remote access VPNs effectively. I believe there's a Radius NPS server that needs to be set up that integrates with your checkpoint. And that Radius NPS server will communicate with your Azure MFA. So that, again, is doable, and there's fairly detailed tech notes on that. Question.
We are
we
are close to getting in the background. We are close to getting that a bit more integrated without the need of the Radius server. For those who aren't aware, that uses SAML, and that is a slightly different protocol to what would have been used. So though it sort of keeps the name, sort of, AD, they are quite different mechanisms underneath. So we are very close to actually making that a little bit more native in the technology, but I expect that to come out in a future release. So, okay.
Thank you, Manning. So question, someone's running 7730 on 5800 appliances, upgrading imminently, not any reason not to go straight to R81. So 81 is a GA release, and it is stable. Checkpoint do have this release methodology at the moment where effectively, until they've seen enough telemetry from around the world, from all the customers running these appliances, they tend not to make a version what in their terminology, the widely recommended version. So at the moment, 81 isn't officially the widely recommended version, but that's not saying that it's not stable. It is stable. We have it running with some of the appliances going on at the moment, but it tends to be customers who see something within 81 and like, right, I really need this feature. Then by all means they can go straight to 81. But at the moment, as it stands, the widely recommended release from Checkpoint is 8040. Is there any future support for Google Authenticated, Microsoft Authenticated rather than RSA natively in Smart Console? Not sure of that, to be honest. I might need to come back to you on that, Neil, unless Manning, you're aware of that.
I think, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Google Authenticator uses, they use SAML. I think that's the big difference, isn't it? So we've always had integrated into the technology, the Secure ID native sort of baked into our technology, whereas I think Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator use SAML. So when we do release that SAML piece, that is going to unlock quite a few different areas of sort of different identity providers that we can connect to. So it's actually quite an important one for us to get out there, and we want to make sure that when it goes out, it is right, because if not done properly, remote access connectivity can be a bit patchy. So that's why we're just taking our time over it. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Dr. Manning.
That's great. we've had one more question that's come in just above that. So, and I do appreciate we're over time. So if we could just try and handle this one quickly. Is there a performance set upgrading from R8010 to R81 on an open server?
It's a difficult one to answer. I would like to take that offline in terms of understand what the box is currently doing. But I would suspect if the box is not under any load and is functioning fine, you shouldn't see any impact on that gateway going from 8010 to 81. But there's multiple factors here. Is it a standalone box? Is it management and gateway, or is it just a gateway? What kind of blades enabled? But bottom line being, 81 is not doesn't add a performance hit on a box as compared to 8010. So yeah.
That's great. So thank you for that, Jay, and thank you, Manning, for answering some questions for us. I think we've probably run out of time now. So any other questions we'll look to answer via email. Just like to say thank you to everybody else for joining. I know that it's hard to find an hour out of the day sometimes, and I know we've run over, so I appreciate you staying on. But with that, I'd like to close the session. Thank you, everybody, and yeah, we'll hope to see you on the next session.
Perfect. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.